Hello, I'm Caroline Cabrera, Director of Education for Miami. The Greenhouse Teachers Lab is brought to you by Miami. These modules aim to provide teachers with creative writing strategies supported by a trauma-informed lens. Through projects, events, and publishing, we create a platform for amplifying Miami's people, investing in a new, shared narrative of our city and a more equitable picture of its future. We believe that art and self-expression should be equally available to every Miamian. In this module, artist and educator Sara and licensed psychotherapist and board-certified art therapist Elia Khalaf introduce the multiple intelligences theory and provide teachers with a practical classroom application of that theory.
Hello. So today we're going to explore a module which is actually a celebration of multiple intelligence in the classroom through writing.
This module includes an introduction, an activity, and a conclusion.
Starting with the introduction, we go over the principles and the theory behind multiple intelligence.
The activity is an exercise that teachers can incorporate into the classroom that applies the theory.
And finally, in the conclusion, we connect the dots back to the theory.
Our main mission today is to be able to promote confidence for you to incorporate this theory into your classroom on a regular basis. We also have a companion guide that can help support you in implementing the lesson that we'll share into your classroom. So what is multiple intelligences theory?
So this theory is inspired by Gardner, who is a psychologist and scientist, and he proposes that intelligence is actually not a fixed or singular entity. It's more complex and it's multiple. So by definition, each of us can have different levels of intelligences based on our own capacities, abilities, and interests. So some examples of those different types of intelligence might include musical intelligence, logical intelligence, mathematical, kinesthetic, nature-based, which is one of my favorites. What do you think your styles of thinking might be?
I don't want to choose.
Okay, you don't have to. We can
No, I feel connected to a lot of them is why. Like I feel kind of visual, kind of spatial, kind of kinesthetic. Is that allowed?
That is totally allowed, and it's a celebration of exploring things as well. So you don't have to commit to one. It's about getting to know yourself as well. And so this is one of the ways that actually applies to the classroom because it allows for individualized support, strengths-based, so seeing the strength in every student, and broadening opportunities for people to have more things to actually succeed in.
Got it. It seems important to point out that it's not just about how we acquire information, but also how we express information as we're processing new knowledge. So like, for me, I was such an arty kid. I was always drawing in the classroom and teachers would come over and they would see my doodles and they would think that I was goofing off and they'd tell me to stop. But I remember my drawings were like, I could tell you exactly what the teacher was talking about at every little moment of it. When they asked me to stop drawing, I lost that anchor point. So that's an example of me taking in information that's different than what I was expressing at that moment, but it still supported me. And I think it's worth, as a teacher, holding space for the fact that maybe some student behaviors that are like annoying or off task, they could be reflective of their multiple intelligences, and also questioning how can we identify that and support that.
So if we look at some of the data behind who is in the classrooms, right, we know that at least 20% of students in the US in an average classroom experience some kind of neurodivergence. We also know that more than 40% of students have experienced at least one adverse event in their life. So that gives you a picture of who are the students in our classrooms and how their behaviors might be rooted in past experiences or challenges around identity.
Wow, yeah, and it seems particularly important because school systems measure certain kinds of data that prioritizes certain kinds of intelligence, which leaves others totally out of the picture. It's almost rendered illegible. And that bias does contribute to student identity and whether they see themselves as a high achieving student or not. And I think that has adverse effects for both sides of the spectrum, from the kids that are left behind and they might not identify as learners, to the students that are really achieve, but they're never confronted with forms of information that are different than what they're familiar with. So by applying a multiple intelligences lens to our teaching practice, it benefits everybody.
Absolutely. And one last data point that I might share with you is that there's actual research that shows that engaging in open-ended creative expressions like drama or music has direct positive correlations to performance on classes and grades in any regular setting, such as a math class or a reading class.
And classroom culture too, because in a multiple intelligences classroom, every student has their day to shine. right? And it also promotes a growth mindset because not every day is going to be your day to shine. The lesson that we're about to share anticipates the reality of multiple intelligences in all of our classrooms, and it makes it really easy to incorporate it on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis.
All right, let's actually dive into the activity.
It's called a catalyst activity, but what is a catalyst?
So a catalyst is an agent, or it's a type of thing that precipitates a reaction or a type of change.
Got it. So in our case, this is a bell ringer activity with 2 steps and 1 rule. And it's flexible enough to fit to your own class, but it's also pretty straightforward, so students can understand it pretty quickly. So let's get started. The 2 steps are creation and reflection. So essentially, students have a short amount of time to create something, and then we all join together and reflect on it together. And then the rule, the 1 rule of it, is that you're fully engaged the full time. And we'll go into some detail on that in a moment. But let's just get started with step 1, creation. So students walk in the room and they see on their desk that there are some basic supplies wherever they're seated, and there's also an envelope. This is called the catalyst envelope. And every session that you do the catalyst activity, it's filled with something different. So what are some examples of things that could be found inside of the catalyst envelope?
So this is a decision point for teachers, right? What object or catalyst they're bringing in, and we want to relate this back to the different types of intelligence or thinking styles. So one day you might want to honor naturalistic intelligence and bring in something from nature, like a flower, a plant, salt, seashells. If you're honoring or exploring logical intelligence, you might bring in dice, an article. Musical intelligence might be a musical sheet. So different catalysts for different thinking styles.
Awesome. So students walk in, they see this envelope, they open it up. It's different every day, which is kind of fun. And they know that they have a given period of time to create a response to whatever's inside of there. And here's the key thing. Here's where the rule comes in. Any response that they make is a success as long as they are fully engaged for the full time and they're not disrupting others. I leave it to you teachers to come up with exactly how you want to phrase that rule for your students. But the main idea is as long as they're engaged the full time, it's a success.
So different ways that they might respond is dependent on their thinking styles and what they want to explore that day. So students might find themselves choreographing a dance, tracing, drawing, writing, measuring. There's no wrong way to do it as long as they are engaging within the parameters that you've mentioned.
Yes, which at first can be kind of intimidating for students because in the rest of their school experience, they're told exactly what to do. So you might get some questions at the beginning like, is it okay if I? And you can respond right back with the rule. Will you be engaged the full time? Will you disrupt others? And then they answer their own question. Also, as an educator, it can be kind of intimidating to see all the different ways that people can respond, but you've just got to trust this is open-ended and we have data to support that this is all okay. A couple tips that I would have from experience. One is that 15 minutes seems to be a sweet spot for students to be able to get engaged with the prompt, but also not have enough time to finish it. And a lot of times student will bring it home and finish it on their own time without that being an assignment, which is always great. I would also suggest that there's some place that all of their responses go to, whether that's like a binder, a notebook. I had my students fold their own sketchbooks by using paper and stapling that, and it all went in there throughout the year. And then finally, to me, most importantly, it's that I would participate as much as possible. So part of that is to model vulnerability for the students, also to feel the vulnerability directly, to know what it's like to be confronted with new information and have to deliver a thing publicly for students. You know, it's intimidating and humbling and a juicy experience. And finally, like, it just feels good. It's a way to ground into the next class at the very beginning of that class. And that's the creation phase. The timer goes off and students already know that it's time to shift into the reflection phase. Everyone moves their work into some central part of the classroom, ideally a shared surface where everything can be seen. I like the floor and we just circle around it, but everyone's got a different classroom situation. And so from there, students are prompted to identify a piece that they're seeing based off of a question that's asked. Then we do a countdown, 3, 2, 1, and everyone points at the piece that they identified. So what are some questions that we could be asking to bring out multiple intelligences?
So we want these questions to correspond back to the types of intelligences and thinking styles. So one question could be, today, point at the object that made you really feel something. Or another question could be, today, point at the object that you really want to hold and sense or touch. Point at the object that makes you want to sing. So again, relating and corresponding back to the different thinking styles and the way that we're sharing and receiving as well.
And that's it. That's the catalyst. It's made up of 2 different steps. First is creation, then is reflection. So in conclusion, today our module covered a brief introduction to Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences. We also provided an activity that is an example of how to apply that theory in the classroom. Elia, can you help explain the connection between our catalyst activity and that theory?
So essentially the theory is manifesting in 3 different levels. We started with the types of catalysts that you're choosing, then we went into how students generate based on that catalyst, and finally how students share, ask questions, and receive feedback, all based on the multiple intelligences and the thinking styles.
Yeah, and this forms a microcosm for how we as teachers can reflect on our practice in a broader sense as well. It boils down to 3 questions. Can we diversify the kinds of information that we present to students to teach? Are we only presenting it with textbooks or with math equations, or can we mix it up with videos or walks outside to make connections to nature or making drawings? Also, can we diversify the way that we ask students to express their newfound knowledge? So can they draw? Can they sculpt? Can they perform or move around? And finally, how can we diversify the kinds of feedback that we give in response to the things that they make to show us that they've learned? So for instance, like if a student had an essay assignment, of course we want it to have proper language structure and mechanics. But sometimes there are students that are developing in those areas, but they provide a really rich and beautiful description of, say, a sunset, the colors of a sunset, the textures of it. Is it possible for us to create time and valuing and giving feedback to that intelligence so that they know that it's really special, in addition to the other linguistic feedback?
I love that image of a sunset as we are wrapping up. And a final note to mention is that in this culture, especially in school settings, certain types of intelligence are placed over others or are more valued than others. For example, logical intelligence might be prioritized instead of artistic or naturalistic intelligence. But in this prompt, we are celebrating and honoring the diversity and all types of intelligences in the classroom.
I love that. Thank you for taking the time to talk today, Elia, and thank you for watching. Remember, we do have a companion guide for this lesson if you wanted to incorporate our Catalyst activity into your classroom. Thank you.